Some stories stick with you long after they're told. This one didn't happen to me, but it happened to my cousin, Nikki. And every time I think about it, it sends a chill down my spine. It was an ordinary Friday night. Until it wasn't. Nikki was on Skype with his girlfriend Sam. It was around 1 o'clock in the morning, the perfect time for a late-night chat. Sam had been asking Nikki to come over and stay the night, but he wasn't too keen on the idea of driving over that late. As they talked, something unusual caught Nikki's attention. The closet door behind Sam was open, just a crack. It wasn't fully ajar, but enough to make him uneasy. He pointed it out casually. "Hey, your closet door's open." Sam glanced at the door and brushed it off. "Must have been the wind," she said. They both ignored it, chalking it up to something as simple as a draft. About half an hour later, Nikki noticed it again. The closet door creaked open even more. His heart skipped a beat. "Sam, are you sure your little brother isn't hiding in there?" Sam shook her head. "No, the window's open. It's probably just a breeze," she insisted. Nikki didn't push it, though he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in the pit of his stomach. That's when everything changed. The closet door opened completely, and to Nikki's horror, someone stepped out. It wasn't just a trick of the light. There was a figure, a person, moving out of the closet and walking right out of Sam's bedroom. Nikki's heart was racing. "Sam, I swear I just saw someone step out of your closet." Sam, still calm, thought Nikki was joking. "Stop messing with me. There's nobody here. I'm home alone tonight, remember?" Nikki's blood ran cold. She was home alone. That meant whoever had just stepped out of her closet wasn't supposed to be there. He screamed into the screen, "Sam, lock your door right now! Call the police, I'm coming over!" Sam, confused at first, turned and saw the closet door wide open. That's when it hit her. Something was very wrong. She ran to the doorway and let out a blood-curdling scream as she slammed the door shut and locked it. Nikki didn't waste a second. He grabbed his keys and rushed to his car, calling the police on the way. His mind was racing. He had to get to Sam, and he had to get there fast. When Nikki finally arrived, the front door was wide open. His heart pounded in his chest as he ran inside, calling out for Sam. No response. He sprinted down the hallway toward her room. He banged on her door, shouting, "Sam, it's me! Open up!" But there was no answer. Minutes later, the police arrived. They quickly made their way to Sam's room, forcing the door open. There in the corner of the room was Sam. She was curled up, trembling in complete shock. It wasn't until much later that she managed to speak. She told the police that just before she shut the door, she had seen someone standing right in front of her, face to face. A stranger, a dark figure standing just inches away. Sam never found out who had been in her room that night. No one knows how they got in or where they went, but the memory of that dark figure stepping out of the closet still haunts Nikki and Sam to this day. It was supposed to be the perfect start to a new chapter in their lives. My parents were on their honeymoon, and Key West was the ultimate destination. They had just checked into a historic hotel, a place known for its charm and old-world elegance. But what began as a romantic getaway quickly turned into a haunting memory they'll never forget. When they arrived at the hotel to check in, the front desk attendant informed them that the room they were assigned was non-smoking. My dad, being a smoker, requested a different room. Without much hassle, the receptionist switched their reservation, and my parents made their way to the elevator, excited for the adventure ahead. The moment the elevator doors slid open, they were hit with the overwhelming smell of fresh paint. It was strong, almost suffocating. As they stepped into the hallway, my parents noticed a man dressed in painter's overalls. He was working diligently, with all his painting supplies spread out around him. Paint rollers, cans, drop cloths, the works. They walked past him, offering a polite greeting. But the painter didn't even glance up. He didn't acknowledge them at all. My dad, being friendly, figured the man was just too focused on his work. Still, the overpowering smell of paint made them uneasy as they made their way to their room. Once inside, the smell became unbearable. The fresh paint smell that had filled the hallway seemed even worse in the room. It was nauseating. They barely had time to settle in before deciding it was too much to handle. My mom, trying to keep the mood light, suggested they head back to the front desk to ask for another room. When they reached the front desk, they explained the situation to the attendant. But something strange happened. The attendant looked at them with confusion. According to her, there wasn't any scheduled painting on that floor. In fact, she assured them that no paintwork had been done on that floor in weeks. Still, she agreed to change their room once more, offering them a different floor and a fresh start. When my parents returned to grab their luggage, the hallway was eerily silent. The painter was gone, and so were all his supplies. No paint cans, no drop cloths, nothing. It was as if he had never been there. What was even stranger was that the smell of paint, which had been so overpowering just moments earlier, had completely vanished. The air was clear. At this point, my parents were freaked out, but trying to brush it off as a weird coincidence, they decided not to dwell on it. They moved into their new room and settled in for the night, though neither of them could shake the eerie feeling from earlier. The next morning, things took a turn for the truly unsettling. As they headed downstairs for breakfast, they overheard a tour guide talking to a group of tourists in the lobby. The guide was animated, recounting some of the eerie history of the hotel. My parents weren't paying much attention at first, until the guide mentioned the very floor they had initially been assigned to. The guide told the group that many years ago, a painter had been working on that floor. One tragic day, while busy with his work, he accidentally fell into the open elevator shaft and plummeted to his death. Some say that his spirit never left the hotel, continuing his work on the same floor where he met his untimely end. My parents froze in place, their hearts racing. The painter, the smell of fresh paint, his complete disappearance within minutes, it all started to click. They had encountered something that couldn't be explained. Neither of my parents are big believers in the paranormal, but after what they experienced, they were left deeply unsettled. What they saw, or thought they saw, left them with more questions than answers. They never spoke of it much afterward, but that strange encounter on their honeymoon has haunted them ever since. It was supposed to be a peaceful 2-day fishing trip in the North Atlantic, a getaway to enjoy the open sea and each other's company. My wife and I set out from the East Coast with high hopes for a successful catch. The first day went by smoothly. We had a decent haul and spent the night playing cards, listening to music and basking in the serenity of the ocean. Little did we know that serenity was about to be shattered. As night fell on our second day, the sea grew quiet and our catch was less impressive. We decided to pass the time again with a card game, this time without the music. That's when we heard it. An unexpected sound that pierced the stillness. The unmistakable rumble of a boat engine. We rushed outside only to find a man piloting a small rundown motorboat. He was an older man, perhaps in his mid-40s, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap. His boat had no lights, making him appear as a ghostly silhouette against the inky blackness of the sea. He drifted directly in front of our bow, creating an eerie sense of intrusion. I approached him, trying to offer help. "Do you need any assistance?" I asked, my voice tinged with concern. The man responded with a question that puzzled us both. "Do you have any spare gasoline?" I told him we didn't have any spare fuel. He claimed he had plenty of gas, which only deepened the mystery. Why was he asking us for fuel if he had enough? The air grew thick with tension as he stared at me blankly, illuminated only by the deck light of our boat. The darkness around us seemed to close in, intensifying our unease. Breaking the silence, the man asked, "Did you have a good catch today?" I replied that we hadn't caught much, trying to keep the conversation polite despite the oddness of the situation. I then asked how he managed to navigate in the darkness, but he merely chuckled as if my question were a joke. I brushed it off, thinking he must have misunderstood me. With a final, cryptic farewell, "Nice meeting you folks," the man turned his motorboat around and vanished into the pitch-black expanse of the sea. His sudden departure left us feeling deeply unsettled. My wife expressed her fear that he might have been planning to rob us. We frequently interacted with other sailors and fishermen, but this encounter felt different. Disturbingly off. In an attempt to shake off the discomfort, I decided to turn off our lights and sail a bit further north, hoping to put some distance between us and that unsettling figure. We didn't see him again that night, but the feeling of unease lingered. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a piercing scream. My wife's terrified cry cut through the darkness, and I bolted out of bed to find her standing at the edge of our cabin. As I lunged towards her, I saw the shadow of the same man fleeing from the cabin. He disappeared into the night, his motorboat's engine roaring as he sped away into the darkness once more. We immediately sailed back to shore, our nerves frayed and our minds racing. We reported the encounter to the authorities, but despite our efforts, the man was never found, and his motives remained a mystery. To this day, the memory of that night haunts us. The strange, uninvited visitor, the unexplained fear and the chilling scream still give me nightmares. There's something about a stormy night that makes the world feel more isolated, more dangerous. This story takes place during one of those nights, a night I won't ever forget. I always loved storms, the thunder, the rain, the lightning. It was a strange source of comfort for me. My dad worked nights, so I was often home alone, and that night was no different. It was around 2 a.m., and I had just finished watching Forrest Gump for what felt like the 100th time. The storm outside was in full swing, and I was ready to call it a night. There's something about falling asleep to the sound of a storm. It's peaceful. I loved it. But then, I heard it. At first it wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just a noise, something hitting the window. I assumed it was just the rain or maybe a tree branch blown by the wind, so I didn't think much of it. But then, it happened again. This time I realized it wasn't the rain, it sounded like a rock. Something solid was hitting my window, my heart started to race. It couldn't be my dad. He would have called if something was wrong. Another rock hit the window, thud, and then another, thud. I was glued to my bed, paralyzed with fear. Whoever was outside must have known I was there. The light from the TV must have given me away, but I couldn't bring myself to look. I thought, maybe if I ignored it, they'd go away, but the rocks kept coming, faster, louder, thud, thud, thud. The rain had begun to let up, and in that eerie silence, I heard something else. It was the sound of a truck engine, parked just down the street. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just some kids playing a prank. Whoever was out there wasn't going anywhere. And then, bang! Something hit the window hard. That was the final straw. I jumped out of bed, my mind racing. I needed to call the cops. I bolted out of my room and ran downstairs toward the phone, but as I passed the front door, I saw it. There was a face, someone looking right at me through the window, and they were smiling. I sprinted to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and called the police. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The operator told me there was an officer nearby and that they'd be there soon. But whoever was outside wasn't waiting for the cops. I heard them jiggling the doorknob, trying to get in. And then, they started ramming the door, over and over again. I shouted that the police were coming, hoping it would scare them off. Then I ran back upstairs to my room, locked the door and waited. My heart was pounding in my ears. The camera pans to the window where everything has gone eerily quiet. No more rocks, no more banging on the door. The sound of the truck engine revs up, and the camera shows the character listening intently. And then, silence. The rocks stopped. The banging stopped. All I could hear was the sound of that truck engine, driving off. A few minutes later I heard the siren. The police had arrived. When the doorbell rang, I felt a wave of relief, but I was still shaking when I opened the door. I explained everything to the officer. I told him about the rocks, the banging, and the face I saw at the door. I described the person as best as I could, but it wasn't much. Just a face, with a smile that I'll never forget. The officer searched the area, but found nothing. There were no signs of forced entry, no clues left behind, and I realized I hadn't looked out the window, I hadn't seen the truck, hadn't gotten a license plate, hadn't been able to provide anything useful. I still regret it to this day. In the end, there wasn't enough information for the police to catch whoever it was. To this day, I don't know if they were planning to rob the house, or if they had something much worse in mind. Some things are better left unseen, but that night, I'll always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't called the police. Would I still be here telling this story? It was supposed to be a perfect family adventure, a chance for us to bond and experience the great outdoors together. I was 18 at the time, and although camping wasn't really my thing, I was excited. My twin siblings, just 11 years old, were over the moon about the trip. It was mid-July, and we decided to go for it, even though we weren't heading to a designated campsite. Instead, my dad parked our car on a quiet country road, and we hiked about a mile into the woods to find a secluded clearing. We set up 2 tents, one for my parents and one for me and my younger siblings. The sky was clear and the stars were out, making the whole scene picturesque. However, as night fell and we settled into our sleeping bags, I quickly realized that sleeping in the middle of the forest was far from comfortable. It was like trying to sleep on grass, and no matter how much I tossed and turned, I just couldn't get any rest. My little brother and sister were fast asleep, and I envied their ability to drift off so easily. Just when I was beginning to accept that I wouldn't be getting any sleep, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The unmistakable sound of a tent zipper being unzipped. My heart raced as I looked up and saw a figure's head poking into our tent. "Dad?" I whispered, hoping it was just my father checking on us. But the figure quickly withdrew its head, leaving the tent slightly unzipped. My confusion turned to fear as I realized that whoever it was hadn't responded to me. I crawled out of the tent, my mind racing with dread, and headed towards my parents' tent. I unzipped their tent and crawled inside, only to find my parents snugly nestled in their sleeping bags. I shook my dad awake, my voice trembling as I asked if he had just checked on us. He looked at me with confusion and said he hadn't. A cold shiver ran down my spine as he spoke. I then woke my mom, who was equally groggy, and confirmed that she hadn't left their tent either. The realization hit me hard. Someone, a complete stranger, had come up to our tent, opened the zipper and peered inside. My parents seemed to take it seriously, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they might have thought I was imagining things. The terror of the unknown kept me wide awake for the rest of the night. The tranquility of the forest was now replaced with an overwhelming sense of fear and vulnerability. As dawn broke and the first light of day appeared, I finally managed to get some rest. But the chilling experience of that night left me with a haunting memory that I've never been able to fully shake. To this day, that camping trip remains a terrifying reminder of how vulnerable we can be when we venture into the unknown. Be cautious when venturing into the unknown. You never know who or what might be watching.
In 8th grade, I went on a school trip that would stay with me for the rest of my life. It was called the Louisiana Tour, a week-long journey to visit significant historical sites throughout southern Louisiana. We saw beautiful old architecture, sprawling plantations, and learned about the rich, and sometimes dark, history of the region. But one stop on the tour stood out among all the others: the Myrtles Plantation. For those unfamiliar, Myrtles Plantation is notorious for being one of the most haunted places in the United States. The moment we arrived, the air felt thick with history and something else. I didn't know if it was just my imagination, the stories I'd read online about the plantation, or if there was truly something in the atmosphere that felt, well, unsettling. We were part of a larger tour group, maybe around 25 people. We shuffled from room to room as our guide shared fascinating tales of the house's past. The plantation was filled with artifacts from another time: old portraits, antique furniture, and vintage chandeliers. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified. Every shadow seemed to dance just a little too much, but I brushed it off. After all, it was an old house. Then we entered the room. This room felt different. I couldn't explain it, but the moment we walked in, it was like the temperature dropped a few degrees. The tour guide started talking about the history of the room. Though, to be honest, I wasn't really listening. My attention drifted elsewhere. As I stood there, surrounded by my friends, something strange happened. I began to hear a sound, a single sharp piano key being struck. It wasn't loud, just a soft, isolated note, as if someone was pressing a key gently on an old piano. I glanced around the room, searching for the source of the sound, but I didn't see any piano. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off as perhaps some noise from outside. Then, I heard it again. Ping. This time, I turned to my friend standing next to me, my face scrunched in confusion. "Did you hear that?" I asked them, hoping I wasn't the only one. They both looked at me, puzzled. "Hear what?" "That piano sound?" I said, my voice lowering. I could feel a strange sensation in the pit of my stomach, but I tried to stay calm. They gave me an odd look and shook their heads. "No, we didn't hear anything," one of them replied. But there it was again, ping, the exact same note, as clear as day, echoing softly in the room. I turned back to my friends. "You seriously don't hear that? It's happening again," I whispered, hoping they'd catch it this time. But they stared at me like I was losing my mind. I was starting to feel a little self-conscious. Maybe I was imagining it, I thought. Or maybe there was a logical explanation, like an old house settling, or wind playing tricks on me. But just as I was about to shrug it off, something caught my eye. Across the room, a woman, a complete stranger, was staring at me. She didn't say a word, but she had this intense look in her eyes. She slowly raised her hand, pointing at me, and then pointed to her ear. It took me a second to realize what she was asking. "Did you hear that too?" I nodded, relieved that someone else was experiencing the same thing. I wasn't alone in this. The guide continued speaking, but my focus was elsewhere. Then, as if on cue, the guide began to tell a story about the room we were standing in. She described a Confederate soldier who had once lived at the plantation, a man who had tragically died on the property. According to the legend, the soldier had been a gifted pianist, and many visitors over the years had reported hearing him play the piano, especially late at night. My heart started to race. Could it be? Was I hearing the ghost of a soldier playing his piano? The story seemed to match exactly what I was experiencing. The tour guide's voice droned on, but all I could focus on was that singular, eerie piano note that continued to haunt the air around me. As the tour ended, the group started to file out of the room, but I couldn't just leave without finding out more. I approached the woman who had noticed me earlier. I asked her, "Did you really hear it too? The piano?" She nodded, her expression a mix of confusion and nervous excitement. "Yes, I heard it the whole time, just like you," she said. "But my husband and son didn't hear anything. They think I'm making it up." We exchanged uneasy glances. It was a strange comfort to know that someone else had heard what I did, but it left me with more questions than answers. Why had only the two of us heard it? And why did it happen at that moment? As we left the plantation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had experienced something beyond explanation. Was it the spirit of the Confederate soldier, still haunting the room, still playing his piano for anyone who cared to listen? Or was it just some strange, coincidental noise in an old, creaky house? To this day, I'm not sure what to make of it. But one thing is certain. I'll never forget the sound of that single piano key, echoing in a room filled with history, and perhaps haunted by something from the past. Have you ever been to a place with a ghostly past? Maybe you've heard something you couldn't explain? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling encounters like this one. After all, some sounds never really fade away.